Rich Tarani with TMC and TMCnet here. Thanks for watching. Exciting program today. On it, we have Patrick Townsend. He's with Townsend Security. His company recently made some big news, and we're here to talk with him about it. Patrick, how are you?
Good, Rich. Thanks for having me.
It's really our pleasure. So tell me a little bit about your news.
Well, we just announced a partnership with NetLib. They are a provider of encryption technologies for SQL Server. And like we've done with other partners, they're using our encryption key management solution to really bring that compliance that's needed around encryption to their product. So that was really the focus of our recent announcement.
Very exciting. So from a security standpoint, would it be safe to say that if companies are broken into in terms of, let's say, they have their systems compromised via some sort of malware, that this sort of solution could help at least protect the database to some extent?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you have to do a lot of things, right, to get security right. One of those things that you have to do is encrypt the data. If the criminals walk away with the data, if it's encrypted, they don't have access to the actual information. And of course, if you're encrypting the data, you've got to protect those encryption keys. They're the keys to the kingdom, so to speak. And that becomes really the biggest challenge within an encryption strategy, is getting that protection of encryption keys right.
Now, in terms of database performance, are there any hits that companies should be aware of?
Well, with encryption, there's always going to be a performance hit. That's absolutely the case. Fortunately, standing here today, a decade after AES encryption was implemented, we have a lot of very high-performing encryption libraries. And so when you look at Microsoft or IBM or Oracle or a lot of these folks, the encryption libraries have been optimized, and that's very helpful. So impacts today in terms of performance are typically very, very modest. 2 to 4% is not uncommon for our customers when they implement encryption. But you have to be kind of careful about it. How key management is done can affect performance. The other little area around performance is your backups tend to get bigger. I mean, instead of being compressed, I mean, encryption, if it's done right, kind of defeats that compression. So your backups may get a little bit larger, take a little bit longer time. But typically those impacts are very manageable.
So from an end user standpoint, it's similar to taking a little bit of extra time to lock your door before you leave the house. And theoretically, you're going to be safer to some degree because your door is locked, as opposed to just quickly running out the door, right?
Yes. So instead of taping the key to the front door or putting it under the mat where it's easy to find, you're taking extra steps here to protect the data and to protect that key. So yeah, that's a pretty good analogy.
Now, what do companies need to know in terms of the type of encryption that's being used? You mentioned your libraries. Is there anything specifically they should know about them?
Well, when people protect data, they're doing it partly to meet compliance regulations, right? PCI or HIPAA or FISMA, whatever it is. So those regulations are pretty strict about implementing industry standard encryption. In other words, nothing homegrown is going to pass the smell test. This has to be a well-vetted, well-known encryption strategy. Advanced Encryption Standard, or AES, is really the de facto standard for protecting data. So you want to use industry standard methods like that. And then you want to use good practices for protecting the encryption key. That's unique to you, and that's like your front door key. That's what has to get protected. So there are special kinds of applications, key management applications, that do that, and they can be validated to industry standards too. So you want to get all that stuff lined up, because you really don't want to do your encryption project twice, or do your encryption project and then find out that you've not matched good practice and you've got a breach anyway. So those are kind of the key things there about how you approach doing the encryption itself.
So really, there are multiple reasons to go forward with encryption. One of them, of course, is you want to make sure that if someone breaks into your systems, that they don't get access to all of your data, but also you've got to deal with the compliance issues within the industries that you happen to be in. And one you didn't mention that I'd like to add is that the potential for lawsuits if it's shown or it can be proven by a good attorney that you had some negligence in terms of your inability to lock up the data. And then there's another one I'm going to throw in there, and that is that there was an article I saw today about how one of the latest data breaches from an insurance company, I think it was Anthem, they have most likely gone over their insurance allotment. In other words, the damages from this break-in will be greater than their insurance. And subsequently, it's going to come out of pocket, and it could potentially make it more difficult for the company to get insurance, or their insurance rates could increase dramatically. So those are a couple other reasons. Do you have any thoughts on those things I just added?
Oh, yeah, Rich, all those things play into why people want to and should be encrypting their data. There's compliance regulations. I mean, in some cases they have to. There's, limiting potential damage to their brand. I mean, just look what happened to Sony in that respect. Litigation, trying to minimize that. Anthem is just one example where that's the case. And all large companies carry cyber insurance and have some protection. But the damages typically are far more and far, reach longer into the future than people anticipate. So it goes right to the bottom line, which is why we're seeing encryption and data protection really reaching up into boards of directors. I mean, this is now a governance issue. I mean, you mentioned this. Like, have we done proper due diligence? Are we implementing governance the right way? So this is now a governance issue at the highest levels of these companies for all the reasons you were just talking about.
Now, in terms of breaches, I'm sure a company will ask you before they deploy, or they may be thinking about it, is this breach proof?
Well, no security professional would ever talk about something being truly breach proof. That's just irresponsible. You can have problems at any point in your security strategy if you're not doing it correctly, if you're not doing everything you need to do. So we would never use language like that. The way we see this is that encryption is one component, one critical component of a security strategy. I think of it like wearing a seatbelt. I mean, if you're wearing a seatbelt and you're in a crash, you may sustain some injuries. It may not prevent you from having some injury, but would you not wear your seatbelt? I mean, that's we all get that kind of idea. Yeah, you wear your seatbelt, and for that reason, you do encryption. Amazingly, you rarely hear about a data loss where the data was encrypted. Right? I mean, I think about Adobe, which had a breach, a little over a year ago, I think. They were encrypting the data, and that story went away in a couple of days. I mean, the data was encrypted, the story went away. When we look at Target or Anthem or some of these other high-profile breaches, that's a story that never goes away. So I think that kind of gives you the flavor of how we think about this particular issue.
So we've got a confluence of a few things happening. We've got cloud computing giving access, giving massive amounts of computing, CPU resources to any malicious user, as well as governments that are building massive cybersecurity centers to try to potentially decrypt a lot of the data that's out there because they want to see what's going on in terms of, for numerous reasons, whether it's I don't want to point out any countries in particular, but there are countries that are looking to hack into corporate systems. So
sure.
From that standpoint, you mentioned AES encryption, and the question I have there is, do you have a certain bit level in terms of what you suggest?
Well, we by default will just go to the highest level of encryption. We implement 256-bit encryption in our products. Our customers can make choices about that. From my point of view, there's really not that much additional overhead for doing 256-bit encryption, so why not do it? You get a lot of protection. Even with huge amounts of resources, there's no suggestion that 256-bit AES encryption can be broken. I think it's well respected and considered secure. So yeah, we tend to always go to the highest level of encryption, even though theoretically it may not be needed. But I think it gives people a little extra comfort when we do that.
Okay, great. Now, how does your solution or this announcement compare to some of the competitive products on the market or solutions from Microsoft, et cetera?
Yeah, well, I think in the case of NetLib, who are just a great partner, they're really addressing a particular segment of the market. Those folks who are running Microsoft SQL Server standard and web editions, they don't have any true native encryption capability within that database. And so NetLib with their Encryptionizer product are adding transparent data encryption, really an automatic encryption level that's easy to deploy, that's very cost effective. So in this case, I think they've done a lot of things right. They make it straightforward, easy to deploy, it's affordable. A lot of the folks who are running SQL Server are mid and smaller companies or ISVs who have packages built on that. And so I think in this particular case, they have a point solution that's very, very effective. We work with a lot of folks who protect data in IBM and Oracle databases and open source. Those are all very different environments. But I think the ability to be able to deploy encryption in an affordable way, getting it right, is just so important today. I mean, everybody's budget's constrained. Everybody's fighting for IT resources, right? I mean, nobody has enough resource these days, and a lot of times that's outsourced. So I think in this particular case, an affordable, fast-to-deploy solution is just what the market needs.
That's great, Patrick. Is there anything else that the viewers should know about or that we missed or that I didn't ask you?
Well, I think you mentioned cloud, and there's just a rush to get into the cloud, for a lot of reasons. I mean, the cost model there is so great. I think that brings on board its own set of challenges, right? I mean, everybody thinks the cloud is less secure, and even top-tier cloud vendors like Amazon and Microsoft and IBM, who've worked hard to make them more secure, readily recognize the concerns that people have. So, our strategy always from the beginning was you need to be able to do encryption everywhere. And customers who deploy in traditional data centers want to migrate to the cloud. So from our point of view and our strategy, it's to make encryption and key management, those technologies, those core technologies, run everywhere. Traditional IT data center, in hardware devices that we sell, in VMware environments, and in cloud, all work the same way, all work within the models that you hope that they would in the cloud, and all in an affordable way. So I think one thing I think we do uniquely in our particular segment is really make sure our products cross all those boundaries and work in hybrid environments so that customers can make that transition to the cloud.
I should add a comment there, and that is that some customers are concerned, and it's worth pointing out that a move to the cloud means the potential for their information to be subpoenaed or possibly taken or requested by government agencies without their knowledge, and the cloud vendor may or may not give that information to the agency requesting it, depending on what their policies are and how they work. So the issue there is that a company, when a government makes a request for information, the company generally is aware of it if it's in their own data center. But once it's in the cloud, there is the potential that that information could get acquired by other sources without the knowledge of the corporation. And by having encryption on your cloud-based data, that's one more way you can at least take control of that data.
Absolutely. So, yeah, you're right. Cloud vendors don't like to talk about this. It's an uncomfortable subject, and I understand that. And we're quite sensitive about that issue too. So we make sure, for example, that our solutions, when they're deployed in the cloud, have no administrative access by the cloud vendor, nor by us. They're strictly controlled and exclusively controlled by the customer.
So the customer better not forget the passwords or anything like that.
Well, that's true too.
and they probably shouldn't use the word password as their password, right? Is that the case?
I think that's probably a pretty good practice. What do you think?
I'm sorry, I cut you off. Go ahead.
That's okay. I recommend 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. For the password. I mean, no, just kidding. Yes, well, it's a critical component because it goes to what we call key custody, and who has control of your encryption keys. becomes a critical question. I had a CISO at a very large mortgage lender say to me, "Well, we're not going to put encryption key management, on anybody else's service. We have to control that. It's a governance issue under, our regulations." And so this becomes an important issue, and having that strict exclusive key custody is really what drives our customers, to use our products in the cloud. Simply no access to those keys. I mean, you call us and ask to recover your password, you're out of luck. Or if we're asked to give up keys, we can't do it. I mean, we just have no access. So I think that is an important component. It's resonating for people. We've paid a lot of attention to this particular issue.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much for your time today. This was great, and congratulations on the new product release.
Okay, Rich, good to talk to you.
Likewise.